Wait, hold on. We're checking the audio again.
Okay. We are live, experiencing some technical difficulties, which is ironic given that we're working with MIT. Can you hear us now?
We're good.
All right. So this is also an ad. This interview series is brought to you by Verizon.
Hey now.
So good afternoon and welcome to this matinee edition of the MURSD Leads Author Series. I'm Dave Quinn. I'm the Director of Technology Integration for the Mendon Upton Regional School District and also your host. This month's topic focuses on digital games in education, and we're fortunate to be joined by a team of researchers on the cutting edge of this developing approach to education. They're the author of Resonant Games, Design Principles for Learning Games that Connect Hearts, Minds, and the Everyday. With us today is Louisa Rosenheck, a researcher at the Scheller Teacher Education Program and the Education Arcade at MIT. Louisa has been a great resource for us in the district. She was a lead workshop facilitator at our last year's Inspired Learning Convention, and we're looking forward to welcoming her back to test out her new game, Shadow Spec. So Louisa, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
We're also pleased to welcome Scott Osterweil, who is the creative director of the Education Arcade and a research director in the MIT Comparative Media Studies and Writing Program. Scott, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And last but certainly not least, we are joined by Eric Klopfer, the professor and director of the Scheller Teacher Education Program and the Education Arcade at MIT. Eric, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks.
So with our panel, we've got a special panelist today. Our student, a student researcher, actually, a Nipmuc Regional High School senior, immersed in his own exploration of digital gaming research. Welcome, Devin Carr. Devin, how are you today?
Good, you?
Great. So I'll take the first couple questions, and then I'll hand it off to the rest of our panel. Louisa, Eric, and Scott, what we ask all of our authors the same opening question because I think it frames everything we're trying to do. We're exploring this idea of inspired learning or learning experiences that are memorable long after your time in school has ended. What was your most inspiring learning experience during your time as a K-12 student, and how does it shape the work that you do today?
Well, when I think of this, for some reason, our brains work. It's hard to remember the really good experiences, but it's easy to remember the bad ones. And I can specifically remember a couple of learning experiences, which at the time I just thought were boring. But now I can really see why they were not using, student-centered pedagogies. There was this one time, I think it was grade, when I was doing very well, and so the teacher thought, okay, she needs more challenge, and so she asked me to do an extra report on rocks, which was tons of fun, as you can imagine. So when I think about things like that, I think about things that didn't have, and the things that I want to put into our work, which is really connecting with students' interests and letting them create things and explore their own ideas and things like that.
I'll throw in two. It's a common one that's cited, but for me, Model UN in my high school history class really was one of those game-like experiences that has always stuck with me. And the second was an art teacher who had us all making puppets for a puppet show, and I had in my head I really wanted to make puppets that were very different from the form that she was sort of signing, and she let me run with it. She sort of let me go off and do my own thing and come up with something very different from what the assignment was, and it stuck with me, sort of being given the freedom and the power to sort of my own sort of learning in that setting.
I'm going to briefly give 3 examples, since we had 1 and then 3.
Yeah,
I would have gone. I only 1 if I was first. And so I had two high teachers who were really great for their own particular reason. One was my high school chemistry teacher, who had been a chemist before he was a teacher, and lost his sight, so he could no longer do all the lab things that he had done before as a teacher. And he just loved the science and knew the science so well, and it was just it sounds trite, but to call it contagious. It was so contagious, his knowledge and depth of understanding and ways he could communicate around it, and that chemistry is not my favorite science, but I love chemistry because of him. And then I had a 11th grade math teacher who loved math, but he's someone who continued to the ways of teaching math, wrote math textbooks, really just thought about the way that students learned. It was so apparent from the way that he was so passionate about it. But the last one I don't often say, was and probably the one that's influenced my life the most was my high school track coach. Because I actually think that the most important things in high school were running. And it's not, I've been a lifelong runner, but it's about all the things I talk about now determination, grit, and internal motivation and all those. I learned those through things, and I learned them through him, and that was such an important experience.
It's always interesting to hear the responses to these questions, particularly because they all seem to center around similar ideas. So, Louisa, you talked about the negative experience or what not to do as an educator. So a lot of our most memorable experiences at school are sometimes the negative ones. But Scott, you also talked, and Eric, you were talking about this too, the unconventional, the thing that you don't think of as the traditional academic experience. Model UN is usually an after-school club or something extracurricular, track doing the same thing. That's a frequent trend that we see in our responses. And then finally, Scott, you highlighted the teacher's ability to get to yes, or letting you beyond the scope of the norm, or empowering you to follow what you were interested and passionate in. It's amazing how all of the answers, while they're different in the nature of their stories, all kind of center around the same type of topics. So that's really wonderful. Thanks for sharing those stories. I want to pivot a little bit to the book now, and then more broadly the work that you're doing on a regular basis. So Resonant Games, the book that we're discussing, is a project that emerged out of the STEP Lab and the Education Arcade. For those who are not familiar with those two entities, can you just give us a quick overview of the work with those two projects?
Sure. So the teacher education program here is our program where we train MIT students who want to be math and science teachers. So there's no major or minor here in education. And in fact, the pathway that most students follow are the ones similar to the one I followed in my own life, and the one that I mentioned from my history teacher as well, where you're passionate about STEM itself, science, engineering, whatever it is. So people major in those topics. But somewhere along the line, they realize, like, yeah, I'm really excited about biology or whatever it is. But what I'm really excited about is teaching biology or chemistry. And so typically the scenario is someone is an intern one summer at some company in their field, and that was okay. Then the following fall, they volunteer in a school and help out in that program, and go, wow, that was that's what I want to get up in the morning for every day. So we provide a pathway for licensure for those students. So that's our teacher education program. The Education Arcade is our group that's existed probably now for more than 15 years. That's focused on creating, research, designing, educational games. We have a whole staff here who works on these kinds of projects, as well as many undergraduate and graduate students. We work in collaboration with schools, after-school programs, museums, to be able to identify where people are currently struggling with existing media tools and pedagogies, and then we think about ways our techniques can help them, can help motivate, can help teach, can help structure. All the kinds of things that people are looking for and help in the kind of work that they're doing.
More from a kind of an administrative end of it, I think there would be a lot of administrators across the state who would be really interested in bringing in, high quality, early career teacher educators. Do you find that most of your students end up returning back to their home state, or are they staying in Massachusetts, or where do all these amazing potential educators end up?
California. I'm only half joking there. Regardless of what people choose, it seems like half the MD students migrate to the West Coast, regardless of where they started or what they're interested in. And the lure of the West Coast is great. But we do have a number of students. I'll say there's actually two categories that we think about when we that hook teacher education program. There are a small number who are, I'm going to graduate and I'm going to go teach. Some of those people will stay in Massachusetts because that's where their license is. It's easier to stay within the state, even though we have transferable licenses to some other states. So some of those people do here. The other group is the people who say like, I want to be a teacher, but I go work at Google for 2 years. I can pay off all my loans, and then I'm going to go teach. And so those people then tend to spread out more geographically, and I also lose track of. They don't help them in their placement. But you know that a lot of those people do return because they ask for a recommendation later on, or just get in touch with some issue or opportunity that they've come across over time and loop back to us. And we do find that there's a lot of people out there who did go work at Google or some biotech company for a few years, paid off their student loans, and now they've dedicated the rest of their life to teaching, and so they do back to it.
So as a school administrator in one district and a school committee member in another, if there's any of those former Google, whatever tech company employees that are looking for a place to land, please don't hesitate to give them our contact information. We're really impressed with the work that you do with the arcade and the teacher education program. So there are a lot of districts, I'm sure, across the state that would be looking to welcome them to the faculty. But also, let's transition to the book. I found that the title of the book interesting, this idea of resonant. And can you talk a little bit about what you mean when you talk about resonant design, which you referenced throughout the course of the book, and then resonant gaming. In particular, well, there's 20 design principles. There are 4 that really drive the book. So can you just talk a little bit about the idea of resonant design and then the 4 overarching principles that guide your work?
Yeah, I can start by explaining a little bit about kind of this idea came from. So we've, as the chapters in the book sort of case studies, they illustrate, we have worked on a number of different games projects for learning over the years. There are very, very different kinds of games, different formats. But we feel that what they all have in common is that they're trying to give students a really deep learning experience beyond just the game itself. So it's not kind of game where you come to class and you play it for 30 minutes and you've learned something or you've practiced a skill and then you're done. The game we create sometimes are long form where you sit down and play them for a long time. Sometimes they are or cross dimensions. Sometimes they're social with a lot of other people. Sometimes the game is actually a small with technology. Sometimes you have to talk with people in person or do other kinds of activities where a lot of the learning happens. But the games either give you a foundation or they go deeper with some of the ideas or they give you an experience of learning that you get in some other way. So what we really try to do with our learning experiences is make them just so that they are engaging in themselves, but that they connect to something broader, whether it's what you're doing in school or other interests in your life or other phenomena that you notice outside of the game, to have this resonant effect where it's the learning and interest is bigger than any one experience that you've had. You guys want to talk about the
sure? I mean, so we as we looked across all these principles, so we distilled a lot of these principles from the games that we developed, and then we sort of bubbled them up into 4 big categories. maybe I'll cover two and then want to cover two. So the first one is designing for the whole learner. And this is important, and I think it's something that we talk about it in the sense of games, but it's something that we do well in general when we think about designing of school experiences, and that might apply to all these things for that matter. But the whole learner is thinking about the fact that it's not just a kid who's in my class for 35 to 45 minutes, 4 days a week. But this person is a person within a school, has hobbies, has interests. They like other kinds of media. They have other kinds of things that sort of make them tick throughout the day. And so we think about how we do that. How do we sort of tap into their interests? How do we tap into their options? How do we structure this around the time that they have in their whole life? So we really think about the person as a whole learner instead of just someone who's going to be in my class learning object for a small period of time each week. The second one is designing for communities. So it's really thinking about the fact that learning is a social process. You have a lot of talk now about personalized learning, and I think games actually sort of fit well within that space of personalized learning. The fact that learning should feel like it's customized to you based on your interests, your level of knowledge, the level at which you'd like to proceed through it, and you also feel like you have agency within space, that you can do something to affect that learning. At the same time, I think that can go too far, that we forget the fact that learning is a really important social process, and the fact that in the ages deal with, and probably for the rest of your life, but certainly for the lives of tweens and teens, social aspects are so important to sort of incorporate within that. It's important to think about how you with your peers. It's also important to think about how you learn about your peers. And so those social aspects are really important to this. And that doesn't necessarily every game that we create as a player game. Think about what role does it play within that community. So it might be about, I have some artifact can share with somebody, or I have some space where I have dialogue, where I communicate about that game with somebody else.
So the one is designing for knowledge, skills, and practice. That's when I think it's easy to misinterpret. It doesn't mean we're just thinking about content knowledge. I think it's that, in fact, all games, even the most trivial game, is about mastering a challenge, and that we think about the games we think consciously about what are the challenges we're putting in for the player, what kind of mastery are they going to achieve, and how do we align that kind of mastery with their academic goals. And academic again doesn't just mean the things that are in the typical syllabus, although there's nothing wrong with that stuff, but also the student as a long learner. And so the point is that the game should reinforce the student's sense of themselves, the learner, as someone mastering a challenge or acquiring knowledge, and in the process change their identity of themselves as learners. And design for society is really just about the fact that we're all in society, and that the things that do in education are going to have larger societal effects. That it's not just about optimizing each individual's opportunities, but really about thinking about the larger society. So that always comes into the work about the game.
So I was wondering, when you've within the book you discussed, I think, 8 games, but there were 5 collections of games. And across the 20 principles, which do you find to be most meaningful, either the game or the principle, for you as a learner? Is there anything that you particularly look for as part of a gaming experience that you think yields a rich learning environment?
So certainly when I think about educational games, and in my sort of discussions when I talk about the teachers, I think this idea of knowledge, skills, and practices is a very important one, because it speaks to the fact that sort of on the knowledge side, we need to design for the practicalities that currently that people are facing in schools. Like, I need to teach photosynthesis. I need to teach algebra, and I maybe that I really believe that grit and teamwork are the things that I need to be teaching, but I'm accountable for teaching algebra. So I want to recognize that, okay, well, that's A, you're accountable for this, so we need to make sure that's important, and B, those things actually are useful, and we want to think about the knowledge as something that's useful in and of itself. At the same time, the skills and practices are also really important, and that's in fact I think what a lot of educators are emphasizing more and more these days, including us. So I think thinking about the ways to sort of put those together in a way that's not just well, a little bit of knowledge and then a little bit of skills and practices, and a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of practices. We're really thinking about the ways that we sort of design those as a holistic experience, and that connect those things, that make sure that we're respecting and honoring the fact that the knowledge is an important part of the curriculum, but it's not the whole curriculum. That these other things are in fact really what's driving them, and then we can make those live together in a way that makes them both feel like they're serving each other.
For me, I would say one of the most important principles is more around the classroom context and what happens outside of the game. So we talk in the book about creating a classroom culture of inquiry, and all the elements of the game that actually happen outside of the game. So, a game for learning is not just the game. It's all the activities that you design in before it and after it, and the assessments you might do around it, and the assessments that are embedded into it, and the discussions that have the result of it. And a lot of times, this is especially with Braddock's endeavor, which we talk about in the book, but also with some of the other games, it's so easy to say, oh, here's a great education game. Use it in your classroom, and your students will learn a lot. But a lot of times we implement it, or teachers pick it up, they try it, and they feel frustrated. They might feel like, okay, I thought this was some great game. Why is it not working? What does it mean for a Resonant game to be working? It has to be deeply embedded into the classroom culture. So like an inquiry-based game, yeah, it's not going to work that well. It's not going to feel like a meaningful experience if you're assigned the quests and the students all are saying, did I do it right? Did I do it right? Is this what you were looking for? That's just it doesn't fit. So it's important to not only have access to the game and be willing to try it, but also really understand the pedagogy behind the game, and kind of make sure that fits with the way you set it up your room.
On top both, let me just add that I think that what actually, by the time of sort of school, they have already really developed a talent for, in their play lives, taking on challenging, continually building on success, actually through lots of failure, lots of painless failure for them. And to me, what's really critical is that the game experience that students don't experience themselves as someone who doesn't know anything, but rather somebody who's got a certain level of ability, whether it's at a specific project problem or generally a problem solving, that they see their games as being one in which they're building on their past success, rather than a model that's too typical school, which seems to be where we seem to say you don't know anything, let me tell you about this stuff.
And then let's find all the places you still know.
And let's find what you don't know. I really think that we should be looking at education more broadly as building on capabilities that kids have from the day they walk in the door, and games certainly do that. So that's a big part for me.
Yeah, I think we've observed the importance of the fail quickly without consequence to build that resilience in learning. Kids, that's when you watch a student or a youth, participate in a game, that failure is not like an impediment to just, you might get a controller throw once in a while, but there's like that willingness to dive back in. And I have a 18-month-old at home, and just observing him tinker and try and fall down but get back up, and there's this resilience. And I wonder if some of this behavior, this learned helplessness, arrives in as a context of school. And one of the challenges I think with games too, and kids are pretty good at this, is that they can sniff out when it's not authentic. And when you're trying to co-opt, and we'll get into this later, but like the gamification of school, they know that, you know, it's who's made the comparison, chocolate covered broccoli. You know, we've got to do a better job with providing rich, meaningful learning experiences that really resonate with our students. I've done enough of the question asking. I'm going to turn it over to Devin, who's got our next question. Devin, you're muted. I'm going to unmute you real quick. Oh, you're good to go.
So in the work with the teachers and student teachers, how do you get them used to the games, and how do you have them not as the main way to teach a student, but just to help the teacher along with the subject at hand?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot of different ways that we've approached development around the games. I think we've done different kinds of PD, both game specific, like when we're doing a research project around a certain game, we'll have some PD session as well as like NARS and other kinds of teacher materials to explain, communicate things like what is game teaching, how is it teaching that. So like we talked about algebra, and one way that Radix does algebra is by trading in a marketplace in the game. So making sure that teachers can clearly see those connections. But then even more important, it is kind of like I was talking about this is more of the approach. So guiding teachers, you know, it's okay if the students don't all know where they're going first, or if they have to mess around in the game and figure out how it works. That's all part of it. That's important. And you know, we try to remind teachers that you don't have to tell them the answer. If they ask you a question, you don't have to feel like you have to know how the game works. You can remind them to ask something else, or you can remind them just try something else. Keep trying. The great thing about games and the way we try to design our games is that have scaffolding built in. You can tell if you're not doing something that's making progress, and you can try something else. And the environment is set up that. So one of the most important things about teachers using our games is to set their expectations that it's not going to look like learning is suddenly more efficient. You're going to play the game and suddenly they have more algebra than they've ever learned before. They're learning more deeper things, but you have to give them time and give them space to really explore within the game and make meaning out of it for themselves. So we do it through professional development and through class visits and through a lot of times through teachers, co-mentor teachers that we're with throughout the design process. Also giving feedback to the teachers and presenting their experience with the game. A lot of times it's more coming from a fellow teacher than from the person who created the game. So those are just some of the ways that we approach giving teachers the background.
Let me add one little thing, which is, and Louisa touched upon part, which is, so you don't need to be expert at the game. You're the expert as a teacher in many other ways in terms of the ways you think about connections and problem solving. But you do need to play the game. So you can't just sort of say like, that's the thing that my students will do. You really do need to play the game in a sense of what it is. And okay that if your students are way better at it than you are, but you do need to play it and understand how it's played, because it just allows you to sort of have a dialogue, make the connections, and so that's true for the technologies that we use here in the lab. Is that we make sure that when they're going through professional development, they take a chance to use that thing as if they weren't. It's really important just to be able to learn perspective.
One of the things on one project that we encourage the teachers to do was let the kids play the game for a while, and then have the students teach them how to play it. Give the kids a chance to sort of show off what they've mastered.
Yeah, it's so easy caught up in the details. Easy for teachers to feel like, oh, well, I can't give this to students unless I know all the ins and outs. But it's really about your picture. It's about the interaction and the way of thinking that the game brings about, less than how to accomplish each specific thing, how to solve each puzzle in the game.
Awesome. Allison, you are up next.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So I had some questions about curriculum and standards. So as you know, we have to get through certain curriculum and the standards. Do your games, do you think there's enough of a connection between the standards and your game that, teachers could use these, obviously not primarily, but could use them to really get through all that they need to get through?
I mean, we've never, in any of the subjects, we can try to be comprehensive and design a game that hit all the standards and covered all bases. But a fair number of our games actually align with standards. And I can speak to one of the ones that I worked on, Labyrinth. We specifically set out the design of the game with that very much in mind, with that question in mind, was largely designed to be played outside of school time by kids at home on their own online, although they were connected to other students in the process. And that we gave teachers handles on how you could use the kids' gameplay to introduce. So when it was time to introduce variables, we think about what the kids had already done in the game. And we would heed that to different sets of standards. So if you were using a certain set of standards or you work for a textbook, we told you exactly when it was time to maybe introduce the topic. So it's not that we are, and there may be attempts out there by others, I'm unaware of them, to actually sort of design a game literally around standards. But I think most of what we do can be aligned with standards, and we can help teachers see the kids.
Yeah, and just to follow that up, because as you're talking, I'm thinking, but so, it's really about breaking the traditional sort of educational model that, we've had forever. Because I'm an art teacher, I'm not traditional in my approach to most things. So I guess with your PD, because I heard you talk about that, what do you say to the skeptics about this? I mean, how do you convince them to come to your side and see that, we can teach in a bunch of different ways and differentiate for kids? How do you get them there? How would I convince, my colleagues that, hey, we're going to do this. This could be a good thing,
So, I will say that most of who we've worked with are the first wave is typically the more advanced teachers. I suspect like
Right.
Or like I want because I want to continually learn and try and see what goes on, and because I believe that the better way than we're doing it right now. Yeah. And then their friends and peers and colleagues. I think what convinces those folks is that they now have there's a sense that like every school and classroom is unique, which they are, but they also share a lot with their schools and classrooms, and they share most with the teacher in the room door. And so if the teacher in the next door is the one who's actually tried this out, then all it becomes something that's more real to in your classroom. So if you've tried it, you can now pass it to your teacher in the classroom next door, and you can say, hey, I have a sense of how much this time takes. I know what the impact on the exams was. Mm-hmm. I know how much more motivated the students were and how much they refer back to this later on in the year. I know how to get around the technical issues that we might encounter and trying to do that in our school. So that's often the best form of contagion is when you sort of have the teacher work. But that person was the person we need to sort of be a little bit of a risk taker to start with. Yeah.
Right. We also a fair amount of work we do co-design, so working with teachers. So it's not that it's hard to get the most skeptical person in the room to begin with, but at least I think we design some of that skepticism. We want to understand what those issues are. Yeah. At least speak to them as best we can. We may not overcome some sort of the person whose attitude is who's destined to say no matter what. Mm-hmm. At least we can say we heard your concern about this or that in the design that we did.
interesting. I think with educational games in general, it's such a big field now. There's so many educational games out there of many different kinds. The reason we called the book Resonant Games, and we talked about the principles kind of that our games have in common, is because we wanted to differentiate them. And that's not that they're better than all other genres of educational games, but they're a little bit different. So there are other games that are more short form, very targeted at standards, content standards, and procedural skills. They might give you, kind of drill practice and certain types of problem solving. Those games a lot of the time easier for a very skeptical teacher to try out and adopt. So that may be, even though we think they often don't have deep learning that connects as much to other areas of lives and lifelong learning, but for teachers that are really skeptical about game-based learning, those can be a great place to start. So something that's one class period, something that is very clearly practicing the skill that you're teaching. And then from there, they may notice, what else are the students getting engaged in? What other deeper conceptual conversations are the students having, because they can explore these other parts of the games. And then kind of move on to games like Resonant Games that are more long form, have more of an investment up front. You have to explore the game, take more discussion with peers and things like that. So I think it's like any new thing. It's trying it out in an accessible way first, seeing what's about it, and then following the students' excitement.
Great, thank you.
Our next question comes from Astrid, and before I bring her, our Spanish immersion program educator extraordinaire in, I just thought one point that you made throughout the book was that it's not one game or one type of game to rule them all. It's one approach to hook learners and link their outside of school life with the content and skills that we want students to walk out of our schools with. So I think that's a really important piece that I appreciated as part of the book. Astrid, come on down.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, great. Well, thank you. I really enjoyed the book. And I guess going to some of the points that Allison was about the implementation of the games as it being in the classroom. How are teachers educated to market and implement the game as the teaching platform? I know one of the things that I mentioned was you'd rather not see them be used as instrumentalized play. And currently, where I see in the classroom, we tend to use a lot, apps and stuff we've completed a work and fill in the gap. So how to get out of that mindset with these games?
It's a good question. Yeah. I think, in part, if we do it right, the teacher experiences the game as more integral to the classroom goals, as not just here's a nice add-on. This is a mentor who used term negative sense, memorable interlude. It's something you remember doing, but it had nothing to do with your learning. I think we try to avoid that in our design. We don't want to design memorable interludes. We want to design things that are kind of wired into current practice. Obviously, we're in the current classroom practice. Obviously, on some level, we're trying to shift that practice into more full forms, but we're trying to do that by sort of latching onto that practice and gradually shifting it, rather than saying throw everything you know and try this instead, or do when you have an extra 5 minutes. So that's a sort of a broad. Either of you can examples right off that might help illustrate that. But
all right.
Other than that, as we said earlier, that we do the fact that we are aligning with standards and giving teachers ideas as to how to use this in the context of standards, as opposed to just saying, do this in June, or do this on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, and I think that incorporating, this is true for things besides games, but incorporating games into curriculum, into the classroom as more of a central artifact or a central learning experience, it's a skill. It doesn't naturally, right? It's simpler to kind of fill in the gaps, like you said, with very target specific learning goals. There's PD that we've done some of, and that I think could a lot of could benefit from doing a lot of around how to sort of customize these games and incorporate them, embed them into your curriculum, so that they become a larger experience, something more memorable and more really impactful, that connects with all the other smaller things that you're learning. It doesn't come easy. And although we design our games to work in that way, that doesn't do the whole job. I don't think any game can just be taken off the shelf and you give it to your students. It's this big, exciting experience. A lot of it still has to be facilitated and supported, and that's really a that can be practiced and built.
I think is having this model of experiential learning in mind, which we often talk in the context of this, where you have this reflection cycle where the game is an experience. The game isn't sort of like the game is part of this cycle where reflection and interaction and contextualization are also really important process. And so our design needs to reflect that, where it fits in that cycle, and the way we think about it within the sense of professional development also has to position it within that cycle.
It's not I always think it's a helpful analogy. Stop for a moment and think about really good books that that you use, not textbooks, really good sort of fiction or nonfiction that you use with your kids. On some level, you could swap out those books for games. I don't mean any one particular book, but I'm saying think about it the same way. You would never say, well, this is a great book, so I'll just have all the kids read it, and then they'll get everything they need to get out of it. You would actually have this discussion. You think about interesting projects. You'd think about the handful of who might not like the book and how you might work with them. So the same thing is true with games, in that you even if they're really powerful, they demand a much bigger surround than just the book. Games are the same way.
Allison, you're up next. You're muted, so we'll bring you back in.
He's trying to say something.
Okay.
There you go.
There I am. So my question was about media literacy, and I'm just looking it up now, so make sure I ask correctly. And I guess I want to know your thoughts on media literacy, and how do we bridge the gap between traditional school technology and the kind of like media engagement you're suggesting? I guess, how do we do that and make it work for a school district?
It's a big one.
Sorry.
No, it's a good one.
So I'll start off with, formerly Henry Jenkins, who's done a lot of work in media literacies. Games and simulations were one of the media that he talked a lot in at the time. Maybe we should start there. So I think it's important to think about games as a serious medium, and that includes both the kids in the class thinking about it that way, but it also includes the teachers thinking about it that way as well. So that the kids are not just some thing that you sort of do to make sure that your kids are entertained, rather than a serious medium. Scott mentioned books. Film has often been thought about that way. We can have like fun video that you show on a half day. But a lot of videos I show in class which are much more recent than that and become a really important part of the discussion process. So we need to think about games the same way. We need to think about being critical of them. We need to think about understanding them. We need to think about how to reflect on them, and they should be sort of explicit in that regard. And when you use it in a classroom, it should be an active discussion around, maybe where. So the game is some simulation system. Where does it sort of break from reality, and how do we sort of learn from that thing? So there needs to be some like sort of meta opportunities to sort of step back, not just from the learning experience itself, but thinking about the medium and how you use that medium. And I think increasingly, so we talked a lot about games that are designed to be educational, and there's an increasing use of games that were not designed to be educational that are in the classroom. Even like Minecraft, which is probably the most commonly used game in a classroom at this point. And there is an educational addition to it, but it wasn't designed to be an educational game. So you certainly need to think of a way that medium plays a role in the classroom and in the kids' lives beyond the classroom. And I think bringing these media into informal curriculum is an opportunity to do that.
And partly why you got silent on the question is I think it some level it touches on one of the biggest challenges facing all of us in education, which is I think real media literacy on the part of students means to really have to sort of change education in general. In that, real media literacy comes from a sort of healthy skepticism and curiosity, an ability to think somewhat about systematically about how the stuff of the world its way to us. It's all the kinds of questioning that standard curricula don't do. I mean, when we tell kids, here's a body of knowledge which we want you to absorb, we're not asking them to be skeptical, to be questioners, to think about how things get made. We're asking them to just accept things the way they are. And so I know lots of, I'm going to guess that most of the teachers in this call agree with that we should develop kids that are questioning, curious, skeptical learners in general. And I think to really get at issue media literacy, that's really critical.
I think there's a virtuous cycle to try to promote within this space, which is making games are part of that kind of cycle. And we have other kinds of projects. We don't try them in this book, but other people talk about projects where kids are designing games. And I think it's really important. I mean, a lot of times I'll see something where someone says like, we're teaching a class game design, and what they're really doing is teaching a class on game programming, where you use Scratch or some other tool to make a game, but there's very little thought about the design of the actual game. It's like, here's a template, or you have to make a bounce off a wall, or someone jump on platforms, wherever it is. And there's value in game programming. I'm not saying that doesn't in itself doesn't have that value, but that's not game design. Game design is a much more thoughtful, reflective process where you're drawing in from the medium, thinking about how people use it, and why people have designed it in a particular kind of ways. And I think being more critical of the medium and really thinking about it, I think there is a space for game design in addition to game programming, where you make it part of that cycle and really think much more deeply about the way that you use the medium, about the way your peers use the medium, etc.
Yeah.
And one thing I'll add is with younger kids, there's a lot of talk now, which is a good thing, about how to kind of do media use and screen time in responsible ways. And one of the things that always is a really important point is engaging together. So an adult with the child. And I think in many ways this is just true for older students and children as well, to see that a trusted adult or their older siblings or even peers, that they are also dealing with these tools and media and taken seriously. They are they're also enjoyed, and to talk about what you learn from them and what you shouldn't learn from them, and to question where they came from. So I think all these things that are important build media literacy. A lot of these things come out sort of somewhat naturally when you do things together. in sort of a community practice, even if it's informal, even if it's just for fun. It's gonna come up. Hey, this game. Who did I put this character in here? Things like that.
Thank you.
So we're coming up on the top of the hour here. We got 2 questions left. One from Devin, and then I'll bring us home. So Devin, do you want to take the second to last question?
Alrighty. So my question is for lower income schools. How do you expect them to buy the equipment so that all the students could have the ability to be in this experience?
So I think over time the data shows that we've come to a point where we still have a digital divide, but it's not a digital divide as we had. So the digital divide once was schools that had computers and schools that didn't have computers. That divide doesn't exist really anymore, at least within the United States. It does exist as we look across international borders. But in the United States, if you look at digital access to the actual hardware itself, it doesn't differ much from school to school, regardless of socioeconomic status. What does differ is the experiences that people do in those schools. So the digital divide now is really the sort of more well-to-do schools typically have their students engaged in sort of higher end activities. They're involved in digital media. They're involved in doing things more with games in schools. And without the resources, they tend to be used as note-taking and test prep kinds of software. So I think that the gap really exists in a lot of professional development and in teaching in terms of part of how these things can be part of the culture. Because I think the sense of, well, until our kids can sort of do basic math, we can't have them doing sort of more advanced activities. Well, I think that's not true. We need to make sure that the kids who are in those schools, even before they can do basic math, they're really struggling. They have these other skills as well. So part of that is sort of a marketing and an education campaign around the way that we think that all kids need to have access to these things, and then part of it is then providing the educators in the schools the opportunity to have the professional development to learn those. And I think some of that we do a lot of stuff that's faced it, but more and more we're about ways that we can do that professional development through online media, where we scale that and people have access to it at quite a cost.
Another way that we think about accessibility and equity is in the tools that we make. We are a research lab, but we are not the kind of research lab that is using only the most cutting edge technologies that nobody can afford. I mean, we do have a couple of VR projects that are on hardware that most schools don't have access to yet. But the vast majority of our projects are, on online games that are designed to run on Chromebooks. We do a lot of testing on kind of we consciously done devices that are what schools have. And we bring them to schools often. We make sure that they work when the internet cuts out or when there's a lot of students using them at once. Things are all important to us. So we like keep that in mind when we're designing and architecting and optimizing the technologies that we're using.
It's awesome. I think as budgets don't often seem to keep up with the rate of inflation, particularly on health insurance and special education costs. I don't know if you've been reading the Globe. As a school committee member, the Foundation Budget Review Commission recommendations are super important to making just what we have sustainable. And I think we appreciate when you make those games accessible. But speaking of accessibility and speaking of next steps, a 2-part question to kind of close it out tonight. So other than buying the book, which again we can't recommend enough, we'll put a link out on Twitter so you can grab it off of Amazon or your favorite local bookstore.
And we should add very quickly that actually the book is open access.
Oh, it's open access.
Yeah, feel free to purchase the paper copy, but also if you go to Resonant.Games, and we'll tweet the link out, you can read it online. Oh,
well, even better, but it's worth the investment to keep this kind of work going. So that's step one, read the book. Step two, so what is step two? So on Mondays, people come back, they read it over vacation. How can a teacher get started to bring Resonant Games or Resonant Learning into their classroom, number one? Number two, you write throughout the book the importance of partnerships. What can teachers do to support the work that you're doing in order to continue this research moving forward?
So I think it's important to acknowledge that starting small is okay. It key, like, I'm going to try something for one class period and just experiment this year. And maybe later I'll get a chance another 2 class periods. And next year I might try it for a week. I think it's okay to sort of think about ways that you experiment with this in small ways. And I like that you sort of said resonant learning. I mean, I think a lot of the principles that we define here are things you can apply to formal video games, and I think you can apply those to other kinds of experiences as well. Maybe it's a board game that you're bringing into class. Maybe it's a matter of a live action role playing that you're bringing into class. If you don't have access to the media, or you feel more comfortable not relying on the technology. A lot of those kinds of things can bring in these same kinds of experiences to the classroom without as a first step. And then I think there's, whether it's playing one of our games or sort of using these as criteria to be able to evaluate other learning experiences, is to bring in 1 or 2 other things slowly over time.
Yeah, human beings playing games just as long as they've been writing. So I just say that to suggest that I'm going to guess that every listening play these games. And it might be worth thinking about a game you play that you find challenging and think how to incorporate that in just one class as a sort of first step. It doesn't have to be one of the games we've done, although some of what we've done is on and available. If you go to our website, some of it is downloadable. So otherwise linked. And
our suggestion is, while you're small, find a buddy, find another teacher in your school, or a friend who's a teacher that you already enjoy talking to and with, and run these ideas by them, or see if they want to try out the same game so that you can compare. It makes it a lot more fun to try new things, as we all know about social, and it'll help come up with more ideas and ways to adapt the games and incorporate into your own context. And
then just what can we do to help you? So you've gone out of this. How can we support the research that you're doing? Is there any act of the Massachusetts community?
So certainly there are things that are in active development right now that we're looking for people to invest. There's Aspect, which you said you were involved in, which Louisa's working on. We do have our game on biology that we're looking to test. If you're sort of local IT, we can sometimes bring equipment. Sometimes other schools have some VR equipment that we can work with remotely, and then we're constantly in the state of, I don't know if there's other people for your for the engineering game.
Yeah, we might be doing some testing over the next year. Games around both science and some engineering practices, middle school primarily. So if someone's interested in play testing, again, relatively close to MIT, just sort of left there in a day and back. But
otherwise, we're always in the process of applying for new grants, doing new projects, and as I think both Scott and Louisa mentioned, that a lot of it is about partnerships. So we need to try to figure out, we might have ideas to start with, but we're looking to sort of think about, do those actually solve real problems that you're having real problems that you're facing, and can those in future iterations for us? So we're constantly looking to form new partnerships to develop and test products in new places.
And we don't always have we're not always at a phase where we have things that teachers can try or PD that come to, but we do frequently have them. So it's just keep an eye on our Twitter and our website for when opportunities come.
Yeah, well, I think we as educators have a responsibility to support the work that you're doing. So again, keep all of us posted so we can live up to our end of the bargain. So thank you again, Louisa, Scott, Eric. Really appreciate your time and your writing. Astrid, Allison, Devin, our panelists, thank you for carving out some time this afternoon to ask your questions.
No, thank you.
So we are back. MURSD Leads is back on March 14th, where at 7 p.m. we will be speaking with the author of Mindful by Design, Caitlin Krause. For everyone here in the Mendon Upton Regional School District, I'm Dave Quinn. We'll see you in March. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.